Perfect.
Hi, great. Hello, everyone. My name is Victoria John. I'm an attorney from Unlocal. Thank you, everyone here and on Zoom for your patience as we've had some various technical difficulties. But we are finally ready to get started on today's presentation on employment authorization documents. So before we begin, a little bit about myself, Unlocal, and the collaboration that we have been engaging in. So, yeah, wait, it's not, you need to, it's not moving. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, firstly, as I mentioned, I'm Victoria Jun, and I work specifically within the Career Immigrant Justice Project within Unlocal. That is, I work with asylum seekers who are largely of the LGBTQ community. The other individual who was listed is my colleague Elizabeth Bolton, who also helped collaborate on this presentation. So about Unlocal, we provide legal services, namely with asylum immigration services, adjustment of status, that is green cards, and we also provide services for getting these work permits. And we also provide some education and outreach services. That is, we reach out to some of our local communities to bring you some of these resources and presentations just like this one. We are a nonprofit organization. We are not a part of the government. And this presentation has been brought about with a collaboration between us, the Catholic Migration Services, Central American Legal Assistance, MASA, New York Legal Assistance Group, Venezuelans and Immigrants Aid, and African Communities Together in a collaboration called PSPP. That is Pro Se Plus Project. For both individuals here and on Zoom, I do have a tendency to speak quickly, so please do not hesitate to let me know if I need to slow down if it will be helpful for comprehending the content. So first of all, what is an EAD? So EAD stands for Employment Authorization Document. They're documents that are issued by the U.S. government to allow individuals to work in the United States. These are more commonly known as work permits, and I'll refer to them as work permits from here on out. It comes in the form of a small identification card, and it can be used as a government-issued ID. When you apply for a work permit, you not only get the work permit itself, but you also have the opportunity to receive a Social Security number and a Social Security card. If you're not a U.S. citizen or if you don't have a green card yet, most employers will expect you to have this work permit to make sure that you're legally allowed to work. As an aside, technically speaking, there are instances in which people that we've worked with have had to work without an EAD, but for various reasons, that is, of course, not an ideal scenario. And we would want to try to help people get these work permits.
Press stronger.
What now?
Press stronger.
Oh,
there. There you go. Oh, there it is.
Oh, there it is. All right. This is generally what a work permit looks like. So it's going to have your picture. You're going to have your name, and they're going to give you a USCIS number, card number. It's going to list where you were born and when you were born and your gender. And it will also give you an expiration date right here. So for the purposes of real-life applications, the most important bit of information to pay attention to will be the expiration date. Okay, so now we're going to go over who qualifies for a work permit. So there's many different types of individuals who qualify for a work permit, and that includes DACA recipients, F1 visa holders, that is students, U visa applicants, those with temporary protected status, people under order of supervision, and much more. For the purposes of today, we are going to go over asylum applicants and parolees who are applying for an EAD. Let's see. We're going to start with the asylum seekers first. Right. So for asylum seekers seeking a work permit, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. So the term that is very common when we're applying for work permits for asylum seekers is the asylum clock, or just the clock. And that refers to how many days it's been since you've submitted your asylum application. And this applies whether you've applied for asylum with the USCIS or if you applied with an immigration court. So basically the clock dictates that asylum seekers may submit the application after 150 days have passed. They are eligible to receive it when the clock reaches 180 days. So to put simply, that is approximately 5 months when you can submit the application, and then 6 months when you can receive it. There are a couple of ways that the clock can stop, but we'll go over this a little later. And to make sure that the proper number of days have passed, there's a number that you can call if your case is with the immigration court. That is the number right here, 800-898-7180. Unfortunately, there is not such a direct way to check if your asylum application has been sent to the USCIS, in which case you will just simply have to calculate the approximate number of days since you've submitted that application. So there's a couple of reasons under which the asylum clock might stop. That is to say, let's say, for example, you've been waiting about 80 days since you've applied for asylum, and then all of a sudden USCIS just freezes the clock right there, no matter how many days it's gone past. So there's a couple of reasons under which this might happen. So for example, if your asylum application is with the USCIS or the asylum office, if there's a request to transfer the case to a new office, or a request to reschedule the interview, a failure to appear before your interview or a biometrics appointment, and these would be considered delays that are caused by the applicant. If the case is pending before an immigration court, a request for the case to be continued so you can get an attorney, that will delay or stop the asylum clock. A request to grant a motion to change venue, that basically means I would like to change the location in which the court is, in which my case is being decided. Oops. All right, so we're going to go over how to apply for a work permit as an asylum seeker. And this information is specifically for the first time you apply for a work permit. So the way that you apply for one is with what's called an I-765, the application for employment authorization. We're going to go over what exactly you need to put down in an I-765. But aside from that information, there's a couple of proofs and documents that you need to send in addition to the application itself. So that is the proof that an asylum application was filed. So this is going to look a little different depending on how you submitted your asylum application. If you submitted affirmatively, that is, it's not within the court system, then you will eventually get what's called an I-797C, which is a notice of action. And effectively what this is the USCIS acknowledging that they've received your application. You will need to scan a copy of this and send that in. If your case was submitted to the immigration court, however, what will happen is the clerk at the court will stamp your application with the date in which it was received. So you will need to scan a copy of that document with a stamp to prove that your application was submitted on that date. Other than that, you will need some form of identity document with a photo. That can include a passport, foreign ID, and so on and so forth. Please note that if you do submit a foreign ID and it's not in English, or it doesn't have, I know certain IDs have English translations on them, but if it does not have that, then you will need to get someone to translate that into English and include what's called a certification of translation. If you have a visa or a I-94, then you will need to include that as well. A small note about the I-94, the way that you can, if you were given one, then you can look it up online with the passport that you enter the United States with. And if you're applying as a child that's based on a parent asylum application, then you will need a copy of your birth certificate to prove your relations. And again, if that's not in English, then you will need to have that translated. And then you will need 2 identical passport-sized photographs, which will be used on your EAD as like the photo ID. And if you happen to have a criminal record, then you will need to provide copies of what's called a certificate of disposition. Currently, for first-time applications for the work permit for asylum seekers, it is free. And we will go over a little bit later that when you renew, it's not free, and we'll go over details on that as well. Yes.
Question. The identity document, many people have had their passports confiscated and they don't have anything else, a national ID card or anything else. Can they use the immigration documents even at the border that has their picture or something else? Are there any substitutes for that?
So if they don't have any form of ID, then you can try to include that. And if they have any kind of, let's say, for example, that you could encourage them to get like a New York City or state ID as well, and then have them submit that as well. There is a little bit of an opportunity to explain why you aren't including certain information. For example, like a cover letter, just explaining this person's documents were lost or confiscated at the border, so we are not submitting a passport, and things. And then there's a little bit of information that you can put down at the end of an I-765 as well.
Right.
Okay. So for those wondering what a certificate of translation is, it's just simply a document, a very short statement like this, saying I, the translator, certify that I'm competent in both English and the language in question, and that I translated this, whichever document it is, to the best of my ability. This is all you need. You don't need any kind of like notarization, although that would be ideal. But this is the bare minimum that you need to include. Okay. So how do you fill out the I-765? So there's two ways. You can apply mostly by online or by mail. Please note that for me personally, I do submit most of these by mail, so I might not be able to answer all questions related to online. But we are going to nonetheless go over both ways to submit the application. So if you want to submit by mail, you want to go to the USCIS website with the I-765. You can simply Google USCIS I-765 and you will find the relevant page. And you want to download the most recent version of I-765 directly from their website. And you want to make sure that this is the latest version, because if you use an outdated version, there is a chance that the USCIS will send it back to you. And then for applications that you file online, you will need to create a USCIS online account and have a valid email address. So there are limitations to which I-765s can be filed online, but luckily for us, you can file online applications for asylum seekers and parolees. There we go. Other things on the USCIS website include not just the I-765 itself, but further instructions and clarifications if you need it under the document instructions for Form I-765. It will also include a small section here on checklist of required initial evidence if you need to check back over it again. If you happen to be filing by mail, there is a section on the website on where to file, and it is very imperative that you pay attention to the addresses, because there can be different addresses depending on the category of eligibility, as well as potentially the state as well that you're from. Oh, and a side note on the addresses, please make sure that you check this frequently, because USCIS does have a habit of changing this every once in a while. Okay, so now we're going to go over the actual I-765 document itself, page by page. A lot of this information is going to be relatively self-explanatory, but we will nonetheless go over everything to make sure that you understand everything that they require of you. So firstly, at the very top, that says select this box if Form G28 is attached. Please do not check this box if you do not have an attorney helping you with this. A G28, for clarification, is a document that the attorney submits, which effectively says, I am an attorney, I am representing this person with their consent, and I am preparing this document for this client. So if you are doing this without an attorney, or if there's no attorneys involved, please do not check this box. Then you will have the reason for applying for the work permit. In most cases, especially, namely if you are applying for the first time, you will pick initial permission to accept employment. And later, if you're renewing, you will select renewal of my permission to accept employment. There is an option if you lose your work permit, or if it's stolen, etc. But that's going to be 1B right here. So other things are your full legal name, first, middle, and last name. And then any other names that you have used. So for example, if you've used aliases, if you have a maiden name before you got married, and any nicknames that have been prevalent enough to make note of in this document. So for example, with me, I have my legal name is Korean. So for if I were to fill out this application, I would put in my full legal name here. And then for other names used, Victoria is an English name or like a nickname that I use very frequently, so I would put that in. Let's see. So then the next part is some more information about you. So firstly, you're going to have your U.S. mailing address and your U.S. physical address. In a lot of cases, these two addresses are going to be the same, but if you or your client or someone that you're assisting is in a special situation where it's safer or it's more convenient to get mail somewhere other than their physical address, then you would differentiate that here. So then now we're starting to get into a little bit of information where I might need to clarify a couple of things. So firstly, number 8, it will ask for an alien registration number. If you have it, great. If you don't, then that's okay. The USCIS online account number. So here, if you're filing by mail, then you have even less of a reason to include this or even have this. If you're filing online, then and you know the account number, then of course you would fill this in here. Then you have gender, male and female, marital status, single, married, divorced, widowed. Have you previously filed a Form I-765? And if you're applying for the first time, then the answer would be no. And then has the Social Security Administration ever officially issued a Social Security card to you? And in most cases, when we're working with first-time applicants, the answer will be no. And if you're interested in getting a Social Security card or a Social Security number, you would then answer 14 and 15. Do you want the Social Security Administration to issue you a number and a card? Which you would say yes and give consent to disclose information from this application to the Social Security Administration so that they can give you the Social Security number. Next, you have your father's name and your mother's name. For here, of course, you know, if you know your father's name, if you know your mother's name, you would put that there. But in some cases, we've had individuals who don't know their one or both of their parents, and if you don't know, then that's perfectly fine. And then lastly here, it will say, list all the countries where you're currently a citizen or a national. Most individuals will only have one country to put here, but if they're a dual citizen, dual national, then you will put both countries there. So another thing about the Social Security cards, and we will review a little bit more about them later, but please note that the Social Security card will not come at the same time as the work permit. So next we have place of birth. So that is going to be city, state, and the country of birth and your date of birth. And again, whatever information that you do not know for any given reason, then you do your best to fill it in. If not, then you can just put NA. Next you have a Form I-94 Arrival Departure Record Number. So I mentioned the I-94 earlier, and chances are, if you're someone who entered without inspection, you are much less likely to have this number. If you don't have that number, that's okay. If you do, then by all means you can put this in. And then you have passport number or your most recently issued passport. So if you have your passport, then this will be easy to look up and fill in. If you don't have your passport because you lost it or somebody from the border confiscated it, then you can put NA, and you can put a little bit of detail at the very end, just clarifying that you lost your passport or it was confiscated and you never got it back. And then a travel document number. This is distinct from the passport number. And then the country that issued your passport or travel document, the expiration date for the passport or travel document, which again, if you have your passport, then you can look it up. If you don't, then you will put NA and explain that you've lost it or it's been confiscated. The date of your last arrival into the United States, on or about. So this is where, if you remember exactly when you entered the United States, you would put that date. If not, then do the very best you can to give an approximation. Let's see. And then your place of your last arrival into the United States. So some people know exactly where they arrived, and some people just generally cross the border and are not entirely sure. And if you're not entirely sure, then you can generally put down an approximate area in which you think you've arrived. And then they will have immigration status at your last arrival. So if you came here with a valid visa, then in most cases you can just simply put down B1 or B2 visitor. And if you happen to cross the border, then you can put down EWI, which stands for entered without inspection, or no status. Then you have 25, your current immigration status or category. So you will be, since you will be submitting the I-765 after you apply for asylum, then you will simply put down here asylum applicant. Let's see, so 26 is not going to be relevant for asylum seekers and parolees. And then for 27, eligibility category. So for the purposes of getting the work permit for asylum seekers, the category is going to be C8. Please make sure that you put in this correct category, because otherwise this can delay your application, or it can cause it to be rejected. Then you will have several questions related to some of the other categories. So for example, like C3C, C26, and these are questions that you can easily skip as they do not pertain to you. Under C8, eligibility category, it will ask you, have you ever been arrested for and or convicted of any crime? And you will need to be very honest with this. And in many cases, I put in no for the client, as they did not have a criminal record. But if you do have one, then you're going to click yes and provide additional information at the last page of this application. Then C35 and C36, again, these do not apply to you, so you can skip those questions. Okay. So all of this now is just going to be largely relevant to interpreters or preparers. But first, under Part 3, applicant statement. So this is going to be where you can indicate you can understand English, or you can also indicate that either an interpreter helped you or someone helped prepare this document for you. And in certain cases, you might have both an interpreter and a separate preparer, and in which case you would click both 1B and number 2 here. The next part then is relatively straightforward. So you would put in your telephone number, your email address if you have one, and then you would sign the document right here with the date of signature. If you have an interpreter helping you with this, or a separate preparer helping you with this, or both, you would need to fill in their information here as well. So what is their first name? What is their last name? What is their mailing address, their contact information? You'll need to get their signature, and the same thing with the preparer. And then there is an additional component for the preparer where it says you can indicate that you're either not an attorney or an accredited representative, but you still help prepare this with the applicant's approval. Or you are an attorney and you can indicate whether the representation extends or does not extend beyond preparing this, which is to say, which is to indicate this is the only thing I'm doing for this person, or you're doing other things for this person as well. All right, and then lastly, for part 6 is the additional information section. So this is where if you need to clarify anything, whoops. Yeah, okay, so this is where if you need to clarify anything, then there's additional space here to elaborate. Like, for example, if you have a criminal record, then you can explain what it was for. If you don't have your passport information, you can explain very briefly that it was lost or confiscated. But in most cases, you will not need to provide any further information here. All right. So I'm just going to pause for a moment because there are some questions that have been submitted through Q&A. All right. So firstly, do passports need to be translated as well? So this is going to depend on the passport in question. I've seen passports where they have the native language and then they have the English translation of exactly what they're referring to. This should be fine, but if you're dealing with a passport that has no form of English translation at all, then yes, you will need to get this translated by someone. Okay. The next question is, why do you prefer submitting by mail? Are there any advantages to doing it that way? So the reason why our office likes to submit by mail is because if that's the case, then we have the original files in our office. If you were to submit online, of course, the process is much faster, but it does come with a drawback that then the USCIS is the one who owns the original files. So that's just like the small distinction there, but both ways are still valid. Okay.
There's a question about what are some of the risks for the people who are acting as interpreters?
I'm assuming this is referring to any legal risks or consequences to acting as interpreters. Generally, as long as the interpreter is doing their job competently, there should not be any risk. I would imagine the only substantial legal risk you would have as an interpreter is if you grossly misinterpret everything that's being submitted.
And then another question is, does being detained at the border count as a criminal record for the question of part 2?
No. If you've been detained at the border, that does not count for a criminal record. That being said, if you've ever been arrested for for misdemeanors, that's still going to have to be reported.
How do you know if a client has an I-94 number if they're not sure?
Let me just take a moment to bring up the page here. So if you're not sure a client has an I-94 number and you have their passport, you can go to this link over here, which should show up in chat. And for individuals who are in person, I can come back to you and help you find this website. But effectively, what this website does is there's an option to get the most recent I-94. And to get that I-94, you will be referring to the individual's passport. If you don't have the passport, then unfortunately you're probably not going to be able to get that I-94 number. And in addition, if your client has, or if the applicant has entered without inspection, then they're much less likely to have one of these.
Why do you prefer submitted by mail? Are there any advantages doing it?
I get it, yeah. I have answered this, so I'll just go ahead and, yeah, that's okay.
And then I think this one's for Cindy. Is there going to be a copy of the recording via mail?
Yes. At the end of the presentation, we will be sharing the presentation slides QR code so that people can have access to them. And for those who are here, you have the presentation slides on the wall and by the desk as well.
Okay, so continuing on with the presentation itself. So here's what happens after you submit all the application and all the evidence. Excuse me. So after you submit the I-765, the USCIS will send you what's called a receipt notice. If you've already applied for asylum, you'll already be familiar with the I-797C notice of action. And this time, it's just simply going to let you know that they received your work permit application. If you sent this application by mail, this arrives after a couple of weeks. Sometimes it will take a little longer. And if you submit it online, the receipt notice does arrive within a few days. Afterwards, usually this takes around a couple of weeks, maybe a couple of months. But after the I-797C notice of action, you're going to get another one, this time specifying what's called a biometrics appointment. So this is basically where the USCIS will assign you a specific location on a specific date to gather your information and also scan in your fingerprints. Once you receive that biometrics appointment, you want to bring the notice itself as well as your photo ID. So when you receive this, you really want to make sure that you make this appointment. It does technically give you an option to contact them to reschedule, but the process is usually a nightmarish process, and it's just generally much better to try to just make this appointment instead. As far as some of the processing times and receiving the work permit itself, usually first-time asylum work permit applicants get their work permit within within several months. If the USCIS feels like they need more information from you, instead of outright rejecting your application, then they will send in what's called a request for evidence. And they will generally ask you what they need from you, when they need it by, and where to send it. And please take note of the fact that if you receive one, then the address for where you need to submit additional evidence might be different from where you initially submitted the I-765. Okay, and I'm going to answer a question real quick. With the I-797 and the biometrics appointment, are the clients getting fingerprinted twice? Because in order to apply for asylum, you also need to do fingerprints. So the answer is yes, you need to do biometrics for both your asylum application and for the work permit. So, so basically, if you've already done fingerprints for asylum, do not skip the fingerprints for the work permit. Because if you do, then the USCIS will almost certainly cancel that application. You'll need to start over. Okay. All right. So here are some links to check some processing times. So the first link is, well, the processing times. And the second link is the case status. So so you can only really check your the status of your work permit application once you have the receipt notice, because the receipt notice will have what's called a receipt number that you will need to put into this website so that they can pull up your information.
Can I ask how long it's taking right now? Is there any idea how many months?
Sure. So currently it takes around the ballpark of 3 months or less. But the USCIS, alas, can have delays for various reasons. So while I can give you that general time frame, it's not a guarantee. Now we're going to go over Social Security cards. I've mentioned previously that the Social Security card and the work permit do not arrive at the same time. This is because they are being handled by two different organizations. So the work permit is being handled by the USCIS, and the Social Security card is being handled by the Social Security Administration. So usually what happens is the work permit will arrive first. Then the Social Security card should, and emphasis on should, come in within a couple of weeks. If your Social Security card does not arrive within a couple of weeks after your work permit, then you do have the option to look up the Social Security Administration office closest to you using the link that I provided here. And either walk in or make an appointment to get that Social Security card. As far as whether it's better to just walk in or make an appointment, it really depends on the office in question. I've had clients who are able to just simply walk into any given office, and I've also had clients who have been turned away because they don't have an appointment. So it's really a case-by-case basis here. All right, so how long does a work permit remain valid? So for asylum seekers, it will remain valid for approximately 2 years. And so there is, so you would need to renew this every 2 years, assuming that you do not receive asylum before your work permit expires. There's currently an automatic extension of asylum seekers' work permits by upwards to 540 days, but that's if they try to, if they submit their renewal applications before the expiration date, which is one of many reasons why you would need to pay attention to what expiration date is on your card. Related to that, applicants should try to submit renewal applications for their work permit at least a few months before the expiration date. And this is just simply, a matter of preparation, being proactive. Our recommendation personally is to try to submit this around 6 months before the expiration date, because the renewals can potentially take longer than the first time applications. Okay. So when you renew your work permit, largely the process is the same. You will need to fill out the I-765 again. You'll need to submit any passports, visas, I-94 numbers again. You'll need to submit 2 recent passport size photos again. But the difference is you will also need to include a copy of your current work permit, just to prove that you've already gotten one and you're renewing. And also they're going to make sure that you're submitting this on time as well. The renewals can, again, also be done by mail or online. And I think the biggest thing to take note of here is that renewals are not going to be free. And the fee currently is $410. But I do know that for some individuals, $410 can be a little bit of a prohibitive cost. So if paying $410 is going to be very strenuous, then we would apply for what's called a fee waiver. So if you're unable to afford $410 when you renew your work permit, you can attempt to file what's called an I-912, which is the request for a fee waiver. You can find the I-912 through Google search, USCIS I-912, and it should bring up a similar website as the I-765 page. There are generally 3 ways to qualify for a fee waiver. One is if you, your spouse, or the head of your household is getting what's called a means tested benefit. And usually this is going to be Medicaid, and we prove this through a letter from the New York State Department of Health. The second method that you can apply for a fee waiver is if you can prove that your household income is less than 150% of the federal poverty guidelines. And the third way is just simply explaining that you have a financial hardship. The first method, the Medicaid, is the easiest and the most straightforward way to receive this fee waiver. I can go over exactly what you need with respect to that proof here. So this is a sample of a Medicaid letter, and effectively it explains that you are receiving Medicaid through the New York State Department of Health, and it will include some more details about what kind of benefits you're getting and how long you're receiving those benefits. Please note that you might receive a Medicaid card, but this alone is not going to be enough. You need this letter. And the way that you receive this letter is, let's see, is that you would call the New York State Department of Health and simply ask for a Medicaid eligibility letter. Please note that if you are doing this for someone else, you either need to have them call the New York State Department of Health, or you need to have them on the phone with you, expressly giving you permission to call the New York Department of Health. Okay.
There's some questions.
Okay. So I'm going to address a couple of questions here. And the first question is, what luck have you seen with applicants indicating financial hardship as opposed to means tested or household income / federal poverty guidelines? So I probably am not going to be the best person to answer this question, and this is simply because the only way that I've personally done it is through Medicaid. But that being said, I have heard from colleagues that it's just generally going to be a lot more difficult to do the other 2 methods, just because you need a lot more proof associated with the income levels or financial hardship. Let's see. Oops. And in the interest of time, I know we have, I know this is 4:36, so I'll return to some of the other questions at a later time, so that we can just generally finish the main information. Next, we're going to go over work permits for parolees. Work permits are available for those who enter through parole. The main difference here is going to be that you're going to indicate for the category C11 instead of C8. Generally, you're going to have the same requirements as C8 EADs, that is the asylum applicant EADs. But you also need to include a copy of your valid unexpired Form I-94, passport, or travel document showing you were paroled into the United States. You can usually find the most recent I-94 online, and I have gone over that information before, but again, for those in person, I may need to help you find that website later on. Okay, so a couple of other differences for work permits for parolees. The work permits only last for the duration of parole. If the parole period is under 2 years, it's most likely not going to be worth applying because the processing times are very long. And another difference is that the parolee work permits are not free. These are also going to require either $410 or a fee waiver. And let's see, and again, here's the link for checking the case processing times, and you would want to have the receipt notice on hand so that you can put in the relevant information. Okay, so now we're going to go over when you no longer need the work permit. So you're no longer going to need a work permit if you either receive a green card or if you are granted asylum. So asylum applicants, asylum recipients and green card recipients get what's called an unrestricted Social Security card. And that's going to provide them the right to work indefinitely without needing to renew work permits. If you have your work permit at this point and it's not expired, you can by all means keep it and use it as a form of government-issued ID. I'm going to go over briefly what an unrestricted Social Security card looks like. To get one, you're going to need to make an appointment with the nearest Social Security Administration office and fill out an application for a new Social Security card. You're going to need to bring a form of ID that verifies both your age and your identity. And in most cases, a passport will suffice. But there is additional information on what other forms of evidence can qualify for both categories. And you're going to need either a judge's order granting asylum if your case was in the immigration court, or a USCIS notice granting you asylum if your asylum case was with an asylum office. Oh, and another thing that I'm going to have to note regarding the judge's order or the USCIS notice is that they require originals. I know that some people have been able to receive the unrestricted Social Security cards with a copy of those documents, but that's not a guarantee, so you will want to make sure that you have the originals of those documents. It seems to be lagging a little bit. Yeah, I think you can go ahead to the next slide, yeah. Okay, so on the Zoom account, or those of you on Zoom, you should be able to see the slide. We're still waiting on the in-person slide to go forward. But for those of you on Zoom, you will see the difference between a restricted Social Security card and an unrestricted Social Security card. So for asylum seekers who apply for a work permit, the one on the left is what you're probably going to see. The Social Security card with valid for work only with DHS authorization. The unrestricted Social Security card is not going to have that text whatsoever. And please give me a moment while I figure out what's going on with the in-person presentation. There we go. Okay. Yes, and for those in person, you can now see the difference. So this would be the restricted Social Security card with the valid for work only with DHS authorization. And then this is the unrestricted Social Security card with no such text here. Okay, so now I'm going to go over a couple of questions that have been submitted here.
Victoria, can you let people on the Zoom call know that I'm going to pull up the QR code for the presentations as you're answering questions?
Okay.
So to be patient and not to leave.
Okay, sure. My colleague wanted me to note that while I'm going over some questions, she will be pulling up QR codes to both download this presentation and also to give us a means to provide some feedback. That will go up shortly. And for those in person, we'll be able to see those QR codes on the wall over here and also right here in front of my desk. Okay, so let me see here. Okay, that's the same question twice. Okay, so the question here is, do you use the form I-912 date May 10, 2013, which expires on May 31st, 2015 to apply for the fee waiver? So in some cases, the USCIS themselves will not necessarily have the most up-to-date documents. And let me just go ahead and double check for you what the current document expiration date looks like here, just to make sure. Okay, yes, so right now, if you were to look up the I-912 site on Google, you will find the USCIS page with the most up-to-date forms. Currently, the most up-to-date document should be the one that expires on September 30th, 2024. I've mentioned before that you want to use the most up-to-date form possible. Lest you risk the USCIS returning your documents. The same thing applies for the I-912 as well. You will want to make sure that you're using the most recent form. Okay, so the next one, have you had any luck with parolees going in person to the Social Security office to get a Social Security number or card with their parole letter? For myself, I've largely dealt with almost exclusively asylum seekers. So I do not know this question. However, if you would like to follow up on that answer, then I have my email address that I can provide in the chat. And you can just simply mention that you were an attendee at this presentation, just so that I know who you are, and also you can remind me what question you had. All right, let's see. So another question that we received is, would SNAP or WIC qualify for a fee waiver? I'm not entirely sure about WIC, but I do believe a colleague has tried SNAP, and it has not worked in their case, and so that's why we largely default to the Medicaid eligibility letter. I will say that if your client does not have Medicaid, there's two options. So one is to find out if they happen to be eligible for Medicaid, and I do apologize for continuously defaulting to client, as that is a habit, but generally you would want to make sure that you, whether you are eligible for Medicaid, and if so, then you would want to apply for that for purposes of the fee waiver and eventually the work permit. And if not, then if they do not qualify for Medicaid, then either they would need to save up for the 410 or potentially look towards the other two reasons, that is below the federal poverty guidelines and financial hardship, and look at additional instructions on how the USCIS wants you to prove those criteria.
Victoria?
Yes. Let's see. All right, I believe that is all of the questions on Zoom. Does anyone in person have any questions over anything that I've covered today?
I was wondering in terms of once people hit the eligibility for the EAD, in New York State, they can apply for cash assistance. Would a letter from cash assistance be acceptable? Because supposedly they are not working yet, so they don't have, it's kind of ironic to apply for an EAD if you don't have permission yet and you want to prove your income.
Right, yeah. There's definitely that hypocrisy in that sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's definitely very helpful to know and for others to know as well. So thank you very much for sharing. Let's see.
I think we have a question.
Sorry?
Interpreter has a question and you have somebody.
There's a question in Spanish, so that I can interpret.
Okay.
When the asylum application is paused, can we submit for a work permit?
When the sorry?
Cuando puede repetir,
Cuando ya pasaron más de los 150
when it's
días
been more than 150 days.
y en el sistema no sale el reloj permiso avanzado, uno puede someter el permiso de trabajo.
And in the system, the permits aren't there, can we submit for a permit, an application for a permit?
Okay, so the 150 days is a bare minimum that you need to wait before you apply for the EAD. So anytime after the 150 days, you are able to apply. As long as, as I've already mentioned, the asylum clock has not stopped. And again, it is a little trickier if you happen to be someone who has an asylum application with the USCIS instead of the immigration court. But basically you would do the best you can to approximate that date. And then what was the second part of the question again? Something about.
Yes, it was just asking if I could submit the work permit.
Oh, okay, yeah.
But you did mention the second part. Mencionaste algo, hay algo en particular, la segunda parte que dijiste, aunque si se puede someter 150 días después, aunque ¿qué?
Aunque el reloj esté en el sistema, no sale, el reloj está parado.
So eso fue lo que contestó ahorita. She says, can you submit even if the clock has stopped, the asylum clock has stopped in the system?
Okay, so if you know that the asylum clock has stopped for you, as long as it's already been 150 days, you can go ahead and still apply. It doesn't matter at that point. If it just so happens that the asylum clock has stopped before the 150 days, you will want to try to figure out why it stopped. Is it because, there's been a recent request to change locations? Is it because there's been something you might have, an appointment or something that you might have missed? And if it's not either of those things, you may want to reach out to either the USCIS or the court system to try to find out what is going on. Yeah. Of course, with the USCIS, because it's tricky to even look up whether it's stopped in the first place, it's a little harder. If it just so happens that it's too early for you to apply for the EAD, or if the clock has stopped, then the USCIS should be sending you a notice saying we've denied your application because of you're not eligible yet. At that point, you should be able to have a means to contact them and find out what's going on. Okay, and hopefully that answers the entirety of your question as well. Okay, all right. Okay.
I think we're good, right?
We're good?
Yeah. I think we can.
All right, great. Okay, just making sure, any other questions before we conclude this presentation?
There is another question. So let me just.
Bueno, en mi caso, mi reloj estuvo parado porque me cambiaron. Me estaban dando unos cortes separados, dos de mis hijos aparte y yo con el otro aparte. Entonces, cuando yo fui a corte, yo le preguntaba que por qué estaba pasando eso, si ellos habían entrado conmigo. Entonces, lo que él hizo fue de que pasó mi corte de una corte a otra. Entonces, mi reloj se paró.
So in my case, what happened was that my kids were going to court separately than I was, even though we all entered together. And I went to court and I asked, why is this going on? So what happened was that my clock stopped and because they switched my dates to be with my sons in the same court date.
Okay. So then, just to clarify, the clock has been moved to your sons, to align with your sons?
¿El reloj de usted se movió para alinearse con los de sus hijos?
Se movió solo por 10 días, pero ya hace poco, después de esos 10 días, yo me arriesgué y mandé mi solicitud de permiso de trabajo en octubre, la niña me mandaron una carta de que la recibieron, me mandaron de que la estaban procesando, pero como al mes, me mandaron una noticia que me la estaban negando porque los días no le faltaba todavía para llegar a los centros.
You can say bye to the people on Zoom, and then you can answer the question.
It was paused for 10 days, and then it went back to the way it was with them. And then I took the risk and I applied, and then I got a notification that it was being processed, that they received it.
Okay.
And then I got a notification that it was denied.
Yeah, okay. I think I can try to speak with you after the presentation, just because I know it includes a lot more of your personal circumstances. Okay. All right, and
You
then,
can say bye.
see, if your assignment clock stops because you requested more time at your master calendar hearing in court.
I think we can stop and say bye to the people on Zoom, because we've done an hour and a half already.
We done an hour already?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. All right. We'll go ahead and end the presentation here. For those in Zoom, if you had any unanswered questions, I posted my email here. Just please remind me who you are, and also that you were present at this presentation, and then I can get back to you as soon as possible. Otherwise, again, you can download the presentation slides in the QR code that my colleague had posted. And you can also refer to the Unlocal website itself under resources to reference this presentation or some of the other presentations as well. Thank you so much for joining, and it's been wonderful having you here. I hope the information was helpful to you, and have a great rest of your day.